All right, everybody, this is going to be the last part. We might do this in 2 videos. We'll see how long it takes. But right now, the actual game itself is pretty playable. We've got all the game mechanics in place. There's proper combat. We can win. We've already marked it so that the player knows when it's hit 0 life, and it gives us a debug.log message. What we need to do now is add some polish to this thing. We should have a welcome screen when you start the game. You know, press start to begin, and we should have a win screen that kind of celebrates whoever won. So that's what we're going to do now. To do that, we're going to load some different scenes. Now, we've had the scenes folder down here in the project tab this whole time. And if you look in there, we just have our one scene called sample scene. And that's the scene that we're actually looking at right now, sample scene. We're going to need some more different scenes. So what I'm going to do right now is, instead of having this thing called sample scene, let's give this a new name. Let's call this game. Because what this is actually the proper game. Notice it shows up here that we're looking at the game scene now. So we're going to play the game in the game scene, but we're going to press start to begin or whatever in the intro scene. So we need to have an intro scene. Now, we could just have a title page or something like that, but I think I actually want to use the level that we have here, and I've got these characters. Let's just put them on the intro screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use what I already have here. I've got this building in the background. I've got my players. Rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, I'm just going to duplicate the scene that I have. So I'm going to right-click on this, and I can't do it this way. I can do it up here by going to Edit, and I can duplicate there. It says I can hit Command-D on a Windows computer. That will be Control-D. Control-D gets me a duplicate, and it's called Game 1. So I'm going to rename that, and I'm going to call it, you know what, let's do a win screen instead first. Let's do win for player 1, okay? And then let's modify that, and we'll make a duplicate as a win for player 2 screen. So if we look at the top here, even though I've got my win object scene selected down here, we're still looking at the game scene. We don't want to mess this thing up. This is our actual game. So I'm going to double click on win, and it's the exact same scene that it used to be. So we're looking at the player 1 win screen now. So what I want to do is just have a look at the game tab. Because this is going to be a win screen, we don't want split screen. I don't even want the health and mana bars anymore. So now that we're not looking at my game, before you start, be double sure that you're looking at the win screen and not your original game scene. So I'm going to go over to the canvas, and I'm just going to grab all those bars and delete them. We don't need that. Then I'm going to go to player 2, and I'm just going to delete the camera off it. Delete. Yeah, that looks a little weird, right? Then I'm going to go to player 1, and I'm going to grab that camera and pull it off. I don't want this childed to player 1 anymore. I just want this out as the scene. So, and I'm going to make that full height now. So it's going to start at Y is 0, and its height is going to be 1, and that's the entire thing. So if player 1 wins, then we would like to see player 1 here. Well, that's player 2. Let's see if we can't scoot player 1 in front of the camera here. So let's take Z and just... That's not moving the player into view. X. What's happening here? So if I take my my player... Okay, Z is moving him sideways because it's world space, not his own space. So X, there we go. Oh, you know what? I'm silly. I can't see him because the camera is still ignoring him. So what I need to do is go to my main camera, find the culling mask, and have it show player 1 now. Now I can see him in there. So I'm going to take... let's find a good spot. What I want to do is I want to kind of pose them in front of this building. So let's just get up a little higher here. And so I'm going to grab player 1 and kind of put him over here. And we'll spin him around so he's facing forwards. And let's see, what is he at? -10. I'm going to put him at some exact coordinates here. And we'll slide him over there. And so that's about 7. And then player 2, I'm also going to put at -10 and 7. And because this is a player 1 screen, I'm going to just deactivate player 2. So here's player 2. If I come up to the inspector, I can just click him and he's gone. So none of his code will run. None of this, anything is going to happen because he exists in the scene, but he's deactivated. So here's our game. And if we take the main camera, we can actually kind of slide it around so that we can get in front of, there's our guy. I'm going to slide up close to him here. So I'm just manipulating the transform position of the main camera. I'm looking at the game tab while I do this so that I can get the camera positioned how I like. Now, I want to make this guy look a little bit towering and impressive. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower the camera down towards the ground a little bit. And let's scoot closer to him a little bit. And now I'm going to rotate around the x-axis and let's point the camera up at him like that. That gives this larger than life, you're looking at the Incredible Hulk kind of a thing. So there's my player 1 has 1. Now, the other thing that I don't want to do is I don't want my player stats to work anymore. So I'm going to deactivate that. I don't want the player motion to work. I don't want him to have a rigid body. Rigid body's fine. I can leave that. There shouldn't be a shoot script. We should not be able to do anything except let the player stand there. So now when I hit play, he pops up in the air a little bit. It's kind of awkward since we've got the... why is that happening? Let's just move him down onto the ground. Okay. It doesn't matter why it's happening. It's probably happening in our proper game that he's hovering above the ground a little bit. But here's what we can do is we can go to the rigid body component and we'll freeze his position X, Y, and Z. And then let's hit play again and see if he stays this time. Now the game is running and he's not popping up in the air. That's perfect. Okay, so I changed my mind. Now that I have everything in place here, I actually do want the camera to be attached to the player. So here's what I'm going to do. I don't want it attached directly to the player. I'm going to create a new empty game object on the player, and it's going to be called camera holder. Camera holder. Okay, so it has nothing except a position in space. And it's zeroed in exactly on where the player is. It's 0, 0, 0 is the center of the player. Now I'm going to take the camera, now that I've already put it where I want relative to the player. When I attach that to the camera holder, notice that my camera is positioned a little, it's not positioned at the center, right? It's positioned where it still was, but now it's measuring relative to the center of this camera holder. So I'm going to just sort of even it out. My X is not perfect, so I'm going to give it a perfect 0. And let's see, -7. This is all fine. Okay. Now, what I want to do in order to give us a little bit of interest here when this guy wins, I'm going to take the camera holder, which is the camera's attached to that. So I don't have to move the camera. I can move the camera holder here, and I'm just going to rotate it around its y-axis, and that's going to give us kind of this cinematic, larger than life moment, you know, and the big orchestral music will play or whatever. So we can slowly rotate around that and have a look at him, you know, looking impressively into the distance or whatever. It's just stupid purple character. Okay, so that is how that's going to work. We now have a win scene here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this camera holder. Let's duplicate this. First of all, I'm going to save this. going to duplicate. I can't duplicate like that. I'm going to Control D. And it's called WinP2 now because Unity is, when it makes a duplicate, is automatically changing the number to show that it's a new copy of it. So we have a WinP2 screen now. I'm not looking at it yet. WinP2 screen is exactly the same. Now I'm going to make my player 2 be what's here in the center of this. Now my player 2 is already... Wow! That's crazy looking. Because it was the exact same character in the first place. Apparently I don't have the same pupils on both, but it's trying to show us both characters in exactly the same space at the same time. So I'm going to turn the player 1 character off. Now there's no camera, right? That's why we can't see that. So I'm going to actually take the camera holder and pull it off of the player 1 and put it on the player 2, which is activated. So now we can see player 2. Camera holder. This is, let's see, our character has been moved, but our rotation is a little weird. That's perfect. Okay, so now let's make sure that player 2 also is frozen position on his rigid body here. That way he's not going to pop up in the air like that last time. We'll do the same thing. We'll deactivate any of these scripts that allow the player to manipulate it. So you don't have to remove the scripts. You can just deactivate them right there. So player, stats, motion, none of this will work anymore. Okay. So we have our original game. We have player 1 scene, player 2 scene. I'm going to save the player 2 scene. And now I'm going to, let's take this scene. I think I'd rather use one of our win screens to do the next thing. I'm gonna stage both of them in a similar kind of a moment right here as our intro screen. So I'm gonna take the player 2 win and I'm gonna duplicate that, Control D. And we're gonna rename that instead of win 3. There's no player 3. I'm gonna call it intro. And then we're not looking at it yet. We're going to load the intro scene. And I'm going to activate player 1 again now that I'm in the intro scene. Let's activate him. And I'm going to pull him a little to... No, I don't want the X -10. I want to pull him sideways on the Z. About there. And player 2... I'm going to pull the other direction. I've got the camera attached to him. So let's take the camera off of him because I want the camera to stay. I don't want it to follow the character anymore. So player 2 is going to move about like that. Good. And now I'm going to rotate them back towards each other a little bit so they look like they are contemplating fighting each other. There we go. Maybe we'll introduce a fireball to the screen. Yeah? Here's a fireball. Just put it right there. Did I add it to player 1? Where did it go? Oh, I can't add it to my game screen. That's why. So in the scene view, I can add it there. So fireball, just going to put it right there. Going to slide that back in there. Now we can manipulate it from its transform while we look at the game tab. So there's our fireball. Let's raise it up a little bit and kind of get it centered. Okay, so we have ourselves a fireball, and I like that just fine. So now what we need to do is save that, first of all. So if we look at our scenes, we now have a game scene, which looks like this. We now have an intro scene, which looks like this. When we play the game, that fireball will light up. Where's our fireball? Fireball, there it is. There we go. We have a player 1 win screen and a player 2 win screen. We'll come back and make the camera rotate around these guys and make it look impressive. And we'll add some text to these. We'll come back to the intro screen and make some text here, and we'll have some instructions as to how to move the players before the game begins. Each player will be able to look at this and understand what they're supposed to do. Right now, we need to be able to move from scene to scene. So let's go back to our game. It doesn't really matter which part we do this from, but here's how we're actually going to move from scene to scene to scene. The first thing is you have to have your build settings set up properly. So I'm going to come up here to Unity's file menu, and I'm going to say build settings right here. Here's my build settings. Notice this top part right here. It says scenes in build. Now the build is when you go to take your game out of the Unity editor, and you're going to compile it into a version that can be purchased by somebody and run on their PC or their Xbox or their Android device or their PS Vita. Look at all the different things that to Facebook, HTML5. Unity allows you to just click which one of these you want to work on and go for it. Since I'm on a Mac computer, I'm going to pick my Mac PC and Linux standalone. This is what installs by default. You might have to install Mac and Linux instead of just PC when you install Unity. You can always download the builders for these other things. Like if you want PS4, it doesn't install the ability to compile a PS4 version automatically. You have to make sure that that's installed, and you can do that from the installation menu. So anyway, when we're not going to do this yet, but I'm just going to take all 4 of these, shift, and I'm going to drag them all into my scenes in build right here. Now, these are not in the order that I want them to be. It matters which order these come in. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my intro scene and I'm going to slide it up above the game scene. Intro should be scene number 0. That's the beginning. Computers like 0 as the beginning instead of 1. So that's my intro. Game is going to be the second thing that happens, which is scene 1. And then I've got my 2 win screens. So now that those are included in the build settings, I will be able to move between them. If you don't put your scenes into the build settings here, you will not be able to move between them, no matter what your code looks like. So I'm just going to close this. They're in the build settings, and we're fine. Notice if I close that and I come back to it, open the build settings again, they're still there. No, don't build it. Okay. All right. So we're looking at our game scene. Right now, when we, let's see, in our player stats script, we have this thing where if our current health is less than or equal to 0, then we get a debug.log message that the player has died. Okay, so that's where we're going to want to load the new scene. We're just going to load the new scene instead of displaying a debug.log message. To do this, we need a new library that we can get to. So we're going to add the using Unity Engine. Let's see, UnityEngine.SceneManagement. So that will allow us to access some commands that that will let us move to the next scene. So if current health is less than or equal to 0, then what we want to do is load. We're going to go Scene Manager. Notice the difference. Up here in our library, the library is called Scene Management. Inside of the Scene Management library, we have a construct called the Scene Manager. And we're not trying to get to the Scene Management library. We're getting to the script that is the Scene Manager that's going to handle stuff for us. So we're going to go Scene Manager, and we're going to run the function off of it called load scene. And then we need some parentheses and a semicolon. Inside of this, we're going to put some double quotes because we're putting text in here. And what we're going to put in here is the name of the next scene that we're going to, which is going to be win, right? Win P1. So capital, make sure you get the capitalization right. It'll have a problem if you don't get everything exact. It has to be exactly this name. Just to be perfectly sure, it's not like I can misspell win P1, but you might have some crazy names on yours. So I'm going to just click on that and copy the name out of here. And then I'm going to paste it in here. That way you can be absolutely sure that this is exactly the same thing as the title of your scene over here. So at the moment, this should work. Before we do anything else to this, let's test it. So I'm in the game scene, right? I hit play. Player 2 is going to take some shots at player 1. Bam, 2, 3, 4, and then there we go. We have moved to the win scene, which has some weird lighting and stuff that we'll need to figure out. But it does, in fact, move us there. The problem, first of all, other than the lighting, is that our green character didn't actually win. It was the green player 2 character that won. He defeated the purple one. So why is it showing player 1? Well, you spotted that already, I'm sure. It's because I told it to win the player 1, to load the player 1 screen. So what we're going to have to do in here is we're going to have to put another if statement. If, parentheses, and brackets, we need to test which player this is, right? Because the exact same player stats code is going to be on both. So a different instance of it. So when one of them hits 0, we need to check to see which scene we're supposed to load next. So if our game object dot layer equals, double equals, right? Equals 9, that gets us player 1. Then we will scene manager load scene player 1 win, right? Else, there's only one other thing that could happen here. If you're, let's see, brackets. Okay. And paste player 2. Okay. So I'm only checking one thing right here. If this triggers, then our health is at 0. If we are player 1, then load player 1 win screen. If we're not player 1, then load the other win screen because there's not 7 players in here. If this was Battle Royale style, you could have, you know, maybe different layer for everybody. There's ways to make this complex, but here's a very simple way that this is working. So now let's save that and test this again. Okay, so player 2 fires, and we've loaded player 1 screen, even though player 2 won. Know why? I've made a very simple mistake here, is that if the player number 9, layer 9 player, which is player 1, then we load player number 1 win screen, which is perfect, except that we're not measuring up here. We're not finding out if player 1 has won. We're finding out if player 1 has died. So I've got these backwards. If player 1 on layer 9 is the one who is dead, then we need to load the player 2 win screen. Otherwise, load the player 1 win screen. So let's save that. Test again. Here we go. There's our game. Okay, so player 2 is firing at player 1 and wins. There's our player 2. You are the winner. Okay, let's try that again. Let's make player 1 win this time. Fireball, 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 and wins. And there's our purple guy. Excellent. Okay, so we've got this color problem here. This is not actually a problem for us. This is a thing that Unity Editor sometimes does. Editor is this the software where we're building the game. When we actually do the if we come up to the build settings, and we actually build a finished version of the game that we could sell on the internet or whatever, that will not do the same color issue that we were having with the weird lighting. It's just the fact that in the Unity editor, it's cutting some corners to try and keep the processing down, because it has to not only play the game, but it has to build the game all in the same software here. So that is not something that we have to worry about. We do want to check and make sure that when we make the finished game, that will be fine. So I think we're going to call it good for this video right now. We've got our 4 scenes. We've got the beginnings of some code to move from the intro scene to the other ones. Now what we're going to do in the last video, this is going to be the last video, guys, for a finished game. What we're going to do is put some text in these. We're going to animate a couple things with a couple little scripts, like, for example, the camera slowly rotating around our winner in the windscreens, and give some instructions on what to do in the intro scene when they're standing around their fireball. And that's going to be about it. So we'll see you for the last video soon.